I love a good shovelware game. Back before making games was as accessible as it is now, the middle market was where the bulk of releases actually came from. This was especially true for the DS and Wii, which were so broadly successful that software got made for it that some people would argue isn't even a video game. Is Wii Fit a video game? Is The Sun Crossword Puzzles a video game? Touch Dictionary? Who knows? Certainly not me. I am but a small creature with ambitions for world domination. I am not the final judge on what is video's game, but there are some titles that certainly are games that certainly are considered bad by everyone. Except, of course, those of us who received, on one fateful holiday or another, LEGO Battles Ninjago for the Nintendo DS, or Petz with a Z. Just because I found a game in the $1 section of a thrift store doesn't mean it deserves to be forgotten. If I was a video game, that's probably where I'd be resold. So I wanted to take some time to look at shovelware. Games considered bad because of their association with the license, their low budget, or both, in order to figure out if games widely panned or even explicitly made just for a quick buck can still be impactful and meaningful. I picked the DS because, as the last popular handheld that existed before smartphones became ubiquitous, it has the widest variety of strange and interesting titles to choose from. In order to pick from this vast library, I journeyed to a thrift store on one fateful afternoon and absolutely rated their lowest priced DS games. Bakugan, Zack and Cody, Magic School Bus. With these classics of the 2000s in hand, I popped in the first cartridge to try and figure out just why is shovelware so hated. First up is a little puzzle game starring these guys. Kuropoto doesn't have any license behind it, but with the way this game is put together, it is definitely shovelware. Aside from its translation being kinda bad grammatically, it is a tiny game. It's a puzzle game where you try to get this star into its halo in as few turns as possible. Honestly, not a bad idea for a puzzle game, but the first 20 levels don't introduce any new mechanics. It's just this exact same setup with slightly different level layouts, which meant most of the time I just turned the puzzle around until I fell into the right answer. That's not necessarily a bad thing though. The framing of the story makes it seem like this is a puzzle game for kids, and its story is presented like a fairy tale. It's even structured in an anthology, like a little book with stories about the constellations. That's why these are stars and the subtitles, well, cool stars. I honestly wish the game had held my attention better because the art is super cute and I want to see what little story beats they put together centered around their versions of the constellations. Cancer has a straw hat on. You can't do any better than this. The human designs are super cute too. I really wish I had gotten to see more of them before moving on. As small as the game is, there's still quite a few cutscenes between the levels and little things like different game modes, an art gallery, and an album of the game's music. It really seems like the developers wanted to give the player access to all of the stuff they worked so hard on, and I can't blame them. Even though the puzzle gameplay itself is honestly kind of boring, everything else about the game has its own little charms. To me, this sort of title falls right between a larger puzzle game experience and puzzle game apps on a smartphone. The DS was in a pretty unique spot as it was basically a smartphone before those were everywhere, so a lot of titles released on it end up feeling like prototypes of the sort of design we'd see in phone games and apps years later. There's still a lot of holdover influence from more feature-filled titles, so things like the art gallery and story mode ended up in games like Kuropoto. Not every cheap game released for the DS has that level of care put into it though. Some of these experiences are really bare bones, and I mean cartoon cow skull in the desert bare bones. And not to be mean, but Dagedar is one of those titles. It's one of those forgotten mid-2000s toy franchises that really wanted to be Beyblade, but just didn't have the sauce. Honestly, they were really close to being onto something though, since the whole franchise was built around glorified marble races, something that we would later see become popular in 2020. As for the game though, it sure is a game where you race marbles. Dagedar, while trying to be like Pokemon or Beyblade, it's missing a lot of stuff. One of the important tenets of any successful monster catcher is the aspect of transformation. Pokemon come out of Pokeballs and evolve. Beyblades get upgrades and have hologram constellation power-up things. And Dagedar is supposed to be like this too, with each character transforming from their marble form into a monster form. but because that was only present in the website and show, or web series, I'm not really sure what the Dagedar animations were.
Oh yeah? Doesn't scare me. We're a bunch of gamers, right?
The game just keeps all the Dagedar in their marble forms. This means that for the entire game, all the characters are just little circles with different textures on them, which really weakens the appeal of the whole monster collecting part. The racing gameplay isn't bad though. I found it to be decently challenging to get the hang of. I only beat one NPC on one track after a handful of attempts, which stands in contrast to a lot of the other easier games we'll get to in a bit. But really, unlocking marbles and racing are the only things to do in this game. There's no story mode, just Grand Prix, practice race, and time trial. There is no core structure to the game, it's just racing, which is honestly kinda lame. Half the reason I usually enjoy games like this is seeing what kind of silly or just actually nonsensical story gets crammed in to justify the reason everyone is partaking in this one highly specific activity. That's what makes the Yu-Gi-Oh anime so good. That's why Pokemon takes place in a socialist state. Dagedar doesn't really commit to its racing or its collecting, so I feel like it ends up failing at both. The fact that this is basically what a 2D Sonic racing game would look like does give it bonus points in my eyes though. If Dagedar was the underfeatured 2D racing game, then Monster High Skulltimate Roller Maze is the 3D equivalent. What a title though. I was gonna play whatever game Monster High made since the latent potential of a Monster High video game is on some real peak alchemical transmutation levels, but I gotta say, a go-karting game was probably not the right call. I won't linger on that for too long since there are other Monster High games that I should play, but this was the one I picked up at the thrift store, so here we are. As always, Monster High's character design is distinct and fun. It treats creepy and edgy design with a playfulness and creativity that you don't get to see often outside of like Ruby Gloom or Count Chocula. Despite having great art direction and characters to pull from though, Skulltimate Roller Maze just has a handful of tracks and lacks any meaningful side modes or gameplay structure. Its racing also just doesn't make a whole lot of sense or feel very good to control, but that's kind of the expectation with this sort of game. The lack of progression here really hurts though, since other than getting better at this mediocre racing system, there's not really anything to do. The strength of licensed titles comes from being able to interact with their characters in the world, but none of the personality of Monster High shows through in Skulltimate Roller Maze past its Halloween aesthetics. The best you get is one or two lines of banter at the beginning of a race or at the end. Most of the characters share animations too, so there's really no room here for individuality. I gotta say though, some of the songs in this game are pretty good. None of them are earth-shattering, but I like the selection of synths and the general composition style going on. There's a good mix of creepy and energetic that perfectly suits Monster High's feel. That's about all I have to say on it though. It fits right in with the many other licensed go-kart games that are out there. The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, Circle of Spies, is a 2.5D platformer where you control two characters at once, and it somehow does this concept really well. I kid you not, the platforming in this game feels better than a decent handful of major releases. They make controlling two characters at once feel intuitive and crucial to the level design, as there are obstacles that can only be overcome by one character to allow both to progress. The best version I found of this was in the third level, where you have to split up and do two different sections, one more reactionary, and the other more puzzle-based, which suits Zack and Cody both mechanically and reinforces their characters. It's a really solid gameplay experience. And I mean, running around pelting school bullies with tennis balls, dodging a shockingly advanced hotel security detail, crawling through vents, the spirit of the Sweet Life of Zack and Cody is alive in this game. Of course, every guest coming into the hotel is entrusting their personal problems and possessions to a couple of children, and of course there's a conspiracy going on under the surface. There is a Ghostbusters in this game. The pure essence of American children's TV sitcoms courses through the veins of this wretched creature. The art direction could kill an Indian elephant. The levels themselves look fine, but man, this game's character art is a .exe version of itself. It's so uncanny, and they decided for some reason that the permanent eyeless smile should not only be on the twins' character portraits, but the models themselves. It didn't make me want to stop playing. I actually had to force myself to stop since I was having a good time, but still disappointing that an otherwise genuinely really good game just has no vibes. No sauce to call its own. A dry chicken bone. Sauce. Sauce. STAR, All-Star Cheer Squad, an RPG where you are a cheerleader at cheer camp and have to do cheer battles to be the All-Star Cheer Squad. I love it when tournament-style stories get used for stuff other than fighting, and this is no exception. The camp even has rules where once you get challenged, you have to compete to see who's the best cheerleader. Its battles, if you can even call them that, are rhythm games where you have to score better than your opponent using both your execution and the training you do beforehand. So it establishes a cycle of training, battling, and progressing the story as you work your way to becoming the All-Seuss Cheer Squad. I didn't even get through the first day of camp though. These days are dense. They are working these desolate children into their graves. Anyway, days are organized on an activity wheel that you partially get to schedule, but mostly don't. Definitely the type of game to be enjoyed in short bursts, not in one prolonged sitting, which makes sense since this is a DS game. I can easily see taking the game with you and just doing one activity at a time instead of trying to get through them all at once. The minigames themselves aren't actually all that bad, although they are a little bit shallow and repetitive. Granted, I know there are features that make the cheer battles more complex later on, but I feel like for now, I got all I needed out of this game. You get to customize your character, you get to make friends in a little academy, and best of all, you get to jam out to some of the wildest music I've ever heard out of a DS game.
Calling all your booty shakers. Hold up, here I go.
This is the medium at its peak, but for real, I really appreciate how they included stylish, high-energy tracks. It perfectly matches the feel you'd expect from a cheerleader RPG. And while this game does end up being a minigame collection tied together with plot and stats, I could say the same for Paper Mario. So I think it mostly comes down to execution, and All-Star Cheer Squad executes pretty dang okay. There's some real buzzkills in the heap of games I played through though. Even though I don't have much to say on them, I feel like it's important to just acknowledge they exist. Partially to show that, yeah, not every game is enjoyable, and also so that I feel a little less crazy. MySims Racing somehow has more features than Dagedar and Monster High combined, while having just none of the charm. Its overworld and race courses are pretty bland, and I can't say I enjoyed any of the characters or the actual racing gameplay. It just feels like there's a ton of bloat here. Unlockables don't actually come from completing races, you just do a ton of side quests in the overworld that amount to you being an Uber driver, bad pay and all. So until MySims Racing unionizes, I'm not touching it. Ghostbusters for the DS had some pretty silly art direction, but that's all I can say about it because I couldn't even get the first level of the game to load. And that's not because I was emulating it, because I wasn't. I bought a physical cartridge secondhand. Whenever I popped it in, even if it loaded at all, I couldn't get into a level. The Ghostbusters can't bust ghosts, which is bad because the game is haunted. Magic School Bus Oceans. All of my footage for this game is corrupted, and I could not be happier. This game is like if Dora the Explorer was making you do homework. This game is like if Sonic the Hedgehog had laryngitis and decided that his calling in life was poorly teaching a biology class. This game brings to life the true dread Arnold must have experienced on that bus every day, not being able to comprehend the horrors he was witnessing. It's an educational game for kids with some over-the-top voice acting. It's exactly what you'd expect. It perfectly executes what it aims to be, a game version of Magic School Bus for very, very little kids. Do I think kids deserve better games than this, even in the educational space? Of course. Do I think it's justified to trash on a game that wasn't made for me and clearly has goals outside of what I seek out in media? Nah. It's funny to take it over seriously though. A lot of shovelware games are created for a hyper niche audience. I mean, just look at what we've covered so far. Licensed games are made for people who already love the franchise and own a game console, which means you're probably only going to sell to people that have both. That's already cutting down your potential wider audience for the chance to have a greater impact with a nicher set of people. The same goes for MySims or Magic School Bus. I'm not really into The Sims or Miss Frizzle, but people who do like those things are probably going to get way more enjoyment out of it than I did. For shovelware though, that's a hard balance to strike. These games have a certain sales strength baked in since they're relying on a pre-established fan base, but also because those fan bases are smaller, the budgets match. So you can end up with projects that don't really achieve anything new, or projects that don't even take advantage of their licenses in an interesting way. This is tougher for original projects that fall into the shovelware category, because in between the MySims and Petz with a Z and Garfield's Nightmare for Nintendo DS, You get original projects with no pre-established fans to fall back on, and even smaller scopes to work with. And those titles, because of their limitations and low publicity, end up in bargain bins and resales, forgotten and often ridiculed for simply existing. It's not hard to imagine a more cynical take on a game like Kuropoto, but man, sometimes it's in the most obscure corners that you find the most precious of gems. I'm just gonna come out the gate by saying that I am a fan of Bakugan. For those not in the know, it was a toy battling multimedia franchise from the 2000s, complete with a card game and toy line. The cool part was that the game actually involved the toys in a cool way. You roll the Bakugan onto the magnetic card, and when the magnet and the marble connects, here's my big Bakugan that I keep on my desk. He is a precious boy. I was very, very much into Bakugan as a kid. One of the first Halloween costumes I ever cared about was dressing up as the main character Dan. The first game I ever pre-ordered was Bakugan Battle Brawlers for the Wii. But little did I know, the very same game was also on the DS. Usually DS ports of home console games weren't actually the same games at all, but with Bakugan, it is a shockingly faithful recreation, which is great because I already loved the Wii game, so now I get to love this version too. The plot is simple. Bakugan have already crossed over from their homeland Vestroia to Earth because of the work of the evil Halgi and Naga teaming up to take over the Silent Core, which is full of evil and negative energy. Meanwhile, on Earth, 6 kids from all over the world meet on the net and team up to become the Battle Brawlers, a team of highly skilled Bakugan players who each have their own specialty element and special talking partner. Okay, are we doing good with the plot synopsis? Can I get you a glass of water? Okay, so you're this other kid getting picked on by the local Bakugan battle bully when Dan, the certified shonen protagonist, rolls up and teaches you the ropes of Bakugan battles. You vow one day to join the Battle Brawlers, but you're missing a special partner. Then, from out of the sky, Leonidas appears. He's like Dan's partner Drago, except I chose the darkest element, and Leonidas is from the Doom dimension, which is like Bakugan Purgatory. I am the coolest person alive. Mini Baku Demon in hand, you begin your journey to become the #1 battle brawler and stop Halgi's evil plans. This is a game that gives you a self-insert OC that becomes best friends with the main character, gets a cooler pet dragon than the main character, and gets to become part of the hero team and save the world through sheer main character swag. This is the dream of every child, realized in the best way possible. I get to be the Bakugan equivalent of Shadow the Hedgehog. While the DS game doesn't have voice acting outside of a few cutscenes, the writing and story lets you directly engage with all the characters and the world of Bakugan, which is perfect form for a game like this. It carries all the vibes of the series and elevates the real-world game into what the anime looked like, while still keeping systems in place to make you think at least a little about your decisions. I won't pretend that a large factor in enjoying this game isn't clicking with its vibes, because if you don't like how the music and graphics and effects are mishmashing into an anime-inspired western butt rock cyber fantasy world, then this probably will not be enjoyable. The battles mainly come down to having big number, winning the minigame and locking your opponent out of being able to do anything. But I mean, that's how the actual game worked too, so it's not out of line for that to transfer. This is probably the closest to the perfect Bakugan game that could have been made, but it is still intrinsically Bakugan all the way down. It combines the story of the show with the interactivity of the toys in order to elevate both to a new experience. That is really cool, and a perfect example of the potential that licensed shovelware games have. They can create even more meaning for people who already love what the game is pulling from. But of course, there are other shovelware games out there. Games that aren't based on shows or toys, but things that are more broad, more abstract. All-Star Cheer Squad, Horse Girl Game, Touch Dictionary, and Dolphin Island. Okay, this game's setup is actually simple. Your uncle owns an island that's also an aquarium. You and your sibling are working there over the summer. Your goal is to rehabilitate the sea animals, build up the park, and get it ready for opening. It's a great excuse to give you some simulated interactivity with cute sea creatures. Great for people who already love dolphins and want a game about them. Like Nintendogs. But this game is also so much more than that. Unlike other pet sims, this game has characters and a plot. Yeah, that setup isn't just an excuse to play with dolphins. You actually do have to work to make this island ready for opening, and days pass by in the game as you get closer to accomplishing that goal. Most, if not all, of the unlocks are scripted. If there's a point where you get to make choices about expanding the park, I didn't get to it. But this little extra layer on top of the minigames really ties the whole experience together. I won't go so far as to say that there's character arcs, but both you and your sibling come around to helping out and caring for these animals. And I think that works really well. considering how that feeling is reinforced by the game giving you so much one-on-one time with them. You feed them, clean their cages, and train them. You see them get healthier and happier over time as the work you put in, even if it's a little tedious, pays off. The game has a great structure too. It's constantly giving you just enough to manage that it keeps you busy without ever getting overwhelming or boring. The definite highlight is the dolphin training segments. It's literally just doing some gestures on the touchscreen and watching your little guy go. But man, if the animation and sound design don't tie that together into a fun little experience. Having different formats for the minigames like that also helps to break up the game so that it always stays fresh. Something that I found was lacking in a lot of other titles. And yes, even my beloved Bakugan. Dolphin Island may sound a little boring, but I honestly enjoyed some of the tedium. It gave the same energy as taking care of your village in Animal Crossing. Granted, without the customization. And of course, I've got to talk about the art direction. Anime-inspired Western art strikes again. And while some of the characters can get a little wonky sometimes, it knows what it's going for and tries its best to get there. And it succeeds sometimes, especially with the main characters. And there are two, although you don't get to switch between them. You get to choose to be the brother or the sister at the beginning of the game, which locks you in. I appreciate some sort of option is there though, since even though half the main cast is female, you can't choose to be a girl in Bakugan. Dolphin Island could have gone the same route, locking into one over the other for its target audience, but luckily, the game carries this deep reverence for the universal beauty of the ocean. Characters directly talk about how pollution is killing the wildlife, and the main source of the animals on the island is from saving them from pollution in the ocean. That's something that everyone on the island can agree on, no matter who they are. Speaking of characters though, I'm only gonna touch really lightly on this, but there is a character who is native to the island, and his character plays with several stereotypes that could be considered in bad taste or offensive. Same goes for the gender's typed out accent in the text boxes. As far as I can tell, it's not prominent in the game or intended to be hateful in any way, but I felt it was worth mentioning. Getting back to the good stuff, it is beautiful to me how much care is put into the animals in this game. Even when you're not directly interacting with them, the dolphins, orcas, and penguins will always be swimming around, interacting with each other, and occasionally jumping or playing in the water. Like I said earlier, the dolphin training bits are delightful, and I looked forward to them every time. I played this game way longer than I was expecting to, and had to stop myself to go to bed. I only got maybe an hour and a half in, but I feel like I've only scratched the surface on what Dolphin Island has to offer, which is wild to me. Searching for it online just brings up its sequel. You have to scroll down a bit to even find it. I get that it's not some grand adventure, but little games like this have something to contribute to the conversation, and it's a shame that so many of them get outright rejected by most people because they're cheap. There are so many games out there that go unremembered, especially on platforms that are obsolete or just old. Digging into those titles is worth it though. There's an unbridled joy in discovering that deep within an otherwise forgotten title lies art, animation, and systems that work together to create a cohesive experience. That somehow past the deadlines and years of hard work, a mark was left on this game by each artist that says, "I was here." Not every game released gets to do this. There are so many that end up broken, soulless, or just boring. But every once in a while, there's a game in that bargain bin that can make me feel something. Honestly, I really connect with the idea of my small creation being buried in a pile of similar stuff and still somehow reaching someone. That's what making videos has been like my whole life. And just like how not every game I play is a life-changing experience, I think it's okay to make something that's just pleasant and fun. A lot of life is spent doing kind of boring things, but that doesn't make those moments bad. You just gotta enjoy them for what they are, which is exactly how these games are sort of meant to be played. It's kind of how everything is, and that's my goal with these videos. I hope you enjoyed taking this little walk with me today.